I was left reeling from the shock of my dad's death when my stepmom, Diane, changed the locks and announced with a triumphant grin, "This house is mine now. You have no place to go." It was as if the world had collapsed around me. I stood outside the home of my childhood, gazing at the locked door that had turned familiar walls into a fortress, keeping me out. Diane, who crossed her arms victoriously, portrayed calm confidence. After marrying my dad when I was 16, following my mother's death, I thought she was merely strict. However, she soon revealed a controlling side. The day I turned 18, she made clear that she didn't consider me her responsibility. "If you want to stay, you follow my rules," she'd assert, the rules changing unpredictably to keep me constantly on edge. Despite my dad's efforts to maintain peace, I sensed his inner conflict. In the wake of his passing, I returned to gather my belongings, only to find myself locked out. "You can't do this," I protested, voice quivering, but Diane just laughed. "Oh, but I can," she said smugly. "Your father left everything to me. You'll need to chart your own course." Stunned, I doubted my dad would leave me stranded. I reached out to Mr. Carter, my dad's lawyer, who promised to be there shortly. When he arrived, he was accompanied by Mike, my dad's best friend, and a figure akin to an uncle. The moment brimmed with tension, as I felt something significant was about to unfold. Upon their knock, a saccharine Diane opened the door. "Oh, Mr. Carter, Mike, what a surprise," she cooed falsely. "I assume you're here to resolve any confusion." "In fact, we are," Mr. Carter replied, taking charge as he strode inside confidently with Mike at his side, and I followed, heart clenching. Mr. Carter produced a folder from his briefcase and extended it to Diane. "You should probably read this before making more decisions," he advised. Diane, after rolling her eyes, seized the documents. But upon seeing the first line, her composure shattered. "This can't be right," she mumbled, flipping through the papers frantically, as her face paled. "What's wrong, Diane?" Mike inquired, his arms crossed. "You were so confident moments ago." "There must be a mistake," she muttered. "This can't be real." Attempting to digest her reaction, I leaned in to glance at the papers. However, Mr. Carter soon illuminated the situation for me directly. "The house," he confirmed with a reassuring smile, "is yours." The revelation hit slowly, almost surreal. Mike, placing a firm hand on my shoulder, affirmed, "Your dad had an actual will, not the fantasy Diane believed she had." Wobbling from the news, I realized my dad had indeed secured my future by leaving the house to me, leaving Diane visibly shaken and fumbling, unable to comprehend the turn of events. The hallway was silent until Diane sprinted down it, returning quickly with a crumpled pile of papers that she thrust into Mr. Carter's hands. "All of it belongs to me, according to these documents," she declared. Mr. Carter raised an eyebrow, curious. He skimmed over the pages, soon letting out a dry chuckle. "Diane, this isn't your will. This is a draft, an old and signed draft never submitted legally. The legitimate will was updated last year, and based on it, you receive a stipend for living expenses, but the house and savings go to his son," he explained. A grip tightened on the back of my chair as Diane's hands shook while she snatched the new will to examine it. Her demeanor worsened the more she read. "This is fake. This has to be fake," she shrieked, her voice high-pitched. Mike laughed. "It's filed with the court, Diane." "Very much real," he countered. Tears welled in her eyes. "No, no, I devoted years to him. I looked after him. This was supposed to be mine," she cried out, on the verge of collapse. While I almost felt pity for her, I remembered the smug, confident way she had eyed me just an hour ago as she attempted to force me out of my own home. "You're going to have to leave," Mr. Carter stated firmly. Her head shot up. "What?" she gasped. "You heard him. This house was never yours," Mike added. She shook her head, panic rising. "No, no, I was his wife. I have rights," she pleaded. Mike stepped in. "You'll receive what's in the will. But the house? You're not welcome anymore," he told her bluntly. Launching a shriek, she threw the papers to the floor, storming upstairs, slamming doors, screaming that this was a setup, that everyone was lying or that her dad had been manipulated. I stood there, still absorbing everything. Mr. Carter looked at me. "Do you want to give her time to pack? Or are we involving the police now?" he asked. Diane wasn't leaving without a fight. I knew that much, and my instincts warned me this saga was just beginning. Diane raged upstairs, her door slamming, making the walls tremble. "She's taking this well," Mike quipped with a low whistle. Mr. Carter sighed, rubbing his temples. "I've handled some ugly inheritance quarrels, but this one is beyond," he confessed, still processing the events. A fear had gripped me, thinking I'd end up homeless, with only a bag of clothes to my name. But everything changed in these past minutes. This house was mine. My dad had ensured that, but Diane wasn't going to let it go, and I was sure she wasn't finished. Not long after, she reappeared, hauling a suitcase, her movements hurried and offbeat. She stopped in front of us, her breath heavy, face red with fury. "I'll leave," she spat out, "but don't think for a moment this is the end. You people, taking the home of a widow? What kind of monsters are you?" Mike scoffed. "You tried to take his home first, not expecting to lose," he retorted coolly. Ignoring him, she turned to me, her gaze blazing with a hatred so intense I could feel it. "You'll regret this," she vowed, icily calm. With nothing more said, she yanked open the door and marched out. I exhaled. "Is that it?" I wondered. Mr. Carter sized me up. "No, that was only the beginning of her assault. You have not even a day of peace before Diane unleashed her first strike." One morning, loud and angry banging on my front door jolted me awake. Half conscious, I rushed downstairs and peeked through the peephole to see the cops. My stomach churned. Opening the door cautiously, one officer inquired, "Are you my name?" "Yes," I confirmed. "We received a report that you're unlawfully occupying this residence." "We need to have a conversation," he continued. Diane crossed my mind, and my blood boiled. Taking a deep breath, I invited them inside. "Please step in. I have documents to prove this house is mine." The officers exchanged glances and entered. I handed over the legal paperwork Mr. Carter had entrusted to me. After a quick review, it was evident that the report was baseless. The lead officer sighed. "I'm sorry for the trouble. It appears your stepmother tried to accuse you of trespassing. Unfortunately, this isn't uncommon." I let out a dry laugh. "What's next?" "We'll classify this as a fake report," he explained, "but be cautious. People like her often persist." Once they left, I quickly dialed Mike. "She called the police?" he inquired, more amused than shocked. "She's not backing down," I replied. Mike sighed. Desperation makes people behave foolishly. He was spot on. 2 days later, I received a legal notice from a lawyer. Diane was suing me for allegedly withholding her inheritance. Trembling, I read it thrice before calling Mr. Carter. "Let me guess," he chuckled. "She's attempting to claim the house using a frivolous legal maneuver." I relayed the entire situation. "It's merely an intimidation tactic," he assured me. "She hopes the court hassle forces you to yield. She's squandering her money." I mused. Perhaps she's not even funding this herself. Mr. Carter surmised. Likely, she retained a low-grade attorney paid on a contingency basis. Since she won't win, it's only her time she's wasting. Nonetheless, the prospect of a legal battle unsettled me. "What should I do?" I asked. "Leave it to me," Mr. Carter instructed. "I'll respond to the lawsuit and see it dismissed. In the meantime, steer clear of her." I complied, but Diane persisted. The break-in happened a week later. I returned from grocery shopping to find my front door ajar. Fear gripped me as I cautiously entered, adrenaline coursing through. The living room was in disarray, drawers opened, papers scattered. Someone had been rifling through my belongings. With shaky hands, I searched the house. No one was there. However, in the kitchen, I discovered something chilling, a photo of my dad and me, torn in half, sitting prominently on the table. I immediately called 911. The police surveyed the scene, taking notes but finding no evidence of the intruder. "Looks like intimidation," an officer noted, even though nothing was stolen. I didn't need evidence. I knew the culprit. I contacted Mr. Carter. That's enough, he declared. I'm filing for a restraining order. Mike was incensed. She's lost it. If she's willing to break in, she might do worse. Once again, he foresaw correctly because Diane's actions only escalated. Breaking in should have been her breaking point. A sensible individual would concede defeat, but Diane wasn't sensible. Mr. Carter swiftly filed a restraining order. The court granted it expeditiously, given the police reports of her false allegations and the break-in. She was officially barred from approaching. 2 weeks went by with no police at my door, no new court papers appearing, and no signs of Diane lurking in the shadows. I began to think she really had given up, but then one evening I returned home to find a foreclosure notice stuck to my front door. Staring at the paper, I was confused. How could my house be in foreclosure? In disbelief, I immediately called Mr. Carter, asking him to come over. He arrived in less than an hour, and upon seeing the notice, his expression turned grim. "This doesn't make any sense," he said, slipping on his reading glasses. "Your house shouldn't be in foreclosure." We examined all my financial records. I had no mortgage. My dad had paid off the house years ago. The property had no debt. Then Mr. Carter noticed something, his eyes fixed on a particular paper. "What's wrong?" I asked. He glanced at me, his face unreadable. "A new loan has been issued against your house," he explained. I felt a tight knot in my stomach. "What?" I gasped. He slowly put the paper down. "Diane took out a mortgage on your house, a huge one. Since she hasn't paid, the bank is foreclosing." For a moment, I couldn't comprehend how she accomplished that. How could she do that when the house wasn't even in her name? Mr. Carter sighed. "It was in her name for about a month," he reminded me. Suddenly, it clicked. My dad had updated his will not long before discovering the real document. Within that brief window, before the amendment was discovered, Diane falsely claimed the house as hers and secured a substantial loan. Once the true will transferred the house to me, she ceased making payments. "This isn't just theft," I said shakily. "It's fraud." The next morning, Mr. Carter and I visited the bank. It didn't take long to uncover that Diane had submitted fraudulent documents claiming ownership. The bank approved the loan based on those lies. When the real will emerged and the house passed to me, her payments stopped. Mr. Carter confronted the bank's legal team. "You understand this is fraud, right?" The lawyer turned pale. "If what you're saying is true, then certainly, and it's a severe issue," he admitted. "I suggest resolving this discreetly," Mr. Carter advised, "before we sue for approving an illegal mortgage." The bank hastily suspended the foreclosure, pledging to investigate further. But I wasn't finished. I approached the police, where everything took a more bizarre turn regarding Diane's other victims. The detective familiar with Diane's history listened as I recounted the events. "Diane, last name?" he queried, sighing as I confirmed. "She's been under investigation for similar accusations, though evidence was lacking until now. Apparently, she had committed similar schemes against other men she married, exploiting their financial trust and securing hefty loans without their knowledge, leaving many in financial ruin. Unlike before, this time she was caught, thanks to the documents and proof Mr. Carter and I provided." The detective's eyes brightened. "This is what we needed to arrest her," he declared. "While I wasn't present during her arrest, I saw her mugshot plastered across the news after she was apprehended trying to flee. Diane was arrested and taken into custody in a motel, where police discovered her car loaded with stolen items, counterfeit IDs, and an excess of $50,000 in cash. Her offenses included grand larceny, mortgage fraud, identity theft, and obstructing justice. Reports indicated she could be facing up to 2 decades in prison. The evening she was apprehended, I received a call from Mike. "That's certainly one method of tackling a problem," he commented. I exhaled, feeling a weight finally lifted. "She almost succeeded," I confessed. Mike chuckled. "But you possess something she lacked." "What might that be?" I inquired. "A brain," he laughed. A few months down the road, I was officially discharged from any connections to Diane's debts. Keen to avoid litigation, The bank expunged the fraudulent loan, and my home was once again securely mine. Diane's footprint vanished from my life, yet a year later, I received a letter from one of her former husbands, a note of gratitude. Thanks to my case, more victims emerged, and Diane faced a slew of additional charges. She was bound for a lengthy sentence, securing true justice. Diane's capture was merely the starting point of her collapse. As the news circulated, more individuals stepped forward. Ex-husbands, former business associates, and even a landlord she duped on rent. Evidently, Diane's pattern was to exploit victims before vanishing without a trace, but now she was out of options. Her demise began with losing everything, and with Diane confined, the genuine retribution commenced. The IRS soon entered the picture, revealing she not only scammed individuals, but also committed tax fraud over numerous years. Upon closer examination of her finances, additional undisclosed income, hidden accounts, and extensive tax fraud were uncovered. Subsequently, a torrent of civil lawsuits descended. The bank sued for fraud, other victims sought restitution, and the state pursued her for unpaid liabilities. Without any resources to defend herself, Diane found herself owing exorbitant sums in legal fees, penalties, and restitution, with nothing left to her name. Her resources were seized, accounts frozen, leaving her destitute. One day, I received a letter from Diane, almost discarding it but yielding to curiosity. Inside was her handwritten plea. I know you despise me, but I am destitute with no refuge. I recognize my mistakes now, and I beg for your aid if you have any compassion. I laughed at this request. The same woman who aimed to strip me of my home and ruin my life was now pleading for help. I didn't reply, but kept the letter. It represented a personal triumph. Diane's destiny was fitting. Without funds or allies, she drifted between jail, courts, and hostels. Last I heard, she resided in a shabby motel with a menial job, still buried in debt beyond repayment. Her past luxury and cons were gone. She was isolated, impoverished, and forgotten. As for me, I had never been happier. True revenge lay in flourishing while Diane was permanently excluded from my life. I restored my house, transforming it into a source of family pride. Mike and I maintain regular contact, and Mr. Carter still finds humor in the whole ordeal. Diane became nothing more than a regretful recollection, ultimately losing all, while I emerged victorious, proving that sometimes the sweetest revenge is witnessing your adversary's self-destruction.